about mid-afternoon on the first day of the fights, September 19th. The Confederates start to gain footholds at Reed and Alexander's Bridge and start pushing the Federal Army back. And at this time, General John Bell Hood's division comes up onto the field from the Catoosa train station, roughly about 10 to 15 miles away. They're the first division of General Longstreet's Corps, First Corps Army Northern Virginia, to arrive onto the battlefield from the Eastern Theater of the War. When the men of Longstreet's Corps embarked for the voyage to the Western Theater, they were reissued all brand new equipment before they left, because they had just come off the Gettysburg campaign, and the railroad gauges of track back then were different gauges. So the train ride, they would go anywhere from 10 to 20 miles on one train and have to get off and get onto another train and move all their ammo, supplies, artillery, and everything over to a new train just to go another 10 to 30 miles and repeat the process. They went from Virginia down to North Carolina, into South Carolina, and then cut over into Georgia, come in through Atlanta and on up to northern Georgia. And they called the trip to the Western Theater Westward Ho. That's what one of Longstreet's men, as first-hand accounts, said of the voyage. And this is the first war where the railroad has been used to transport troops to different theaters of the war, and it all started right before the Battle of Bull Run. But continuing on, Hood's Texas Brigade is the first one onto the field, and these are the famous Hood's Texas Brigade. And when they come on the battle line, they yell to the Tennessee men as they pass them, "Rise up, Tennessee, and watch the Texans go in." And Longstreet's men they feel superior to the Army of Tennessee, because up until the Battle of Gettysburg, they'd never lost a battle in their eyes. They were superior fighters. And one Tennessee man yelled at the Texas men, "You may be going in, but you've never faced the Army of the Cumberland before." And he was right. The Army of the Cumberland is a hard-fighting army. Even with their commander, General Rosecrans, with his shortcomings, he was a little bit better than Braxton Bragg, but not much better. So at this time, we're leading up into the night on the first day. And during the war, up until this point, they'd never fought at night. And this is at dusk. The still isn't pitch dark. They can still see. On closer to the north of the battlefield, Hood's men is in the south, and General Patrick Claiborne, his division starts their assault on the right wing of General George Thomas's 14th Army Corps. And General Patrick Claiborne is a native from Ireland, and he earned himself the nickname of being the Stonewall Jackson of the West. And Patrick Claiborne is a little different than a lot of the other generals in the Army of Tennessee. He aligns his ideals along with General Robert E. Lee as we should free the slaves and give them the opportunity to fight if they want to on the Confederacy side. A lot of men didn't like the way that Patrick Claiborne's thought process was, along with Jefferson Davis. Patrick Claiborne is one of the fiercest fighters in the Army of Tennessee. He hits the right wing of Thomas's 14th Army Corps at dusk, and they get driven back, but the Federals still continue to hold the line. So at this point, it's complete dark, and nobody can see anything, and the fighting ceases for the night. The rest of the troops that haven't arrived onto the battlefield start arriving, getting online. General Longstreet and the rest of his Army of Northern Virginia, they start to come in onto the battlefield. They cross over at Alexander's Bridge. They come in line right beside Buckner. And at this point, General George Thomas, his men on the northern end, on the Federal side of the battlefield, they start digging in. They start building breastworks. And what breastworks are is they dig trenches, or they pile up logs on top of each other to use it as protection, so they can get behind it and fire, and it cuts down on casualties. So at this point, Braxton Bragg holds a council of war, and he gives General Leonidas Polk the left wing of the army to command, and he gives General James Longstreet the command of the right wing. And at this time, the temperatures start to drop, and it gets below freezing, and a lot of the men on both sides had dropped their knapsacks before going into battle. And it's a common practice that you would drop your blanket roll or your knapsack into a big pile, and you'd leave one or two men from your unit to guard it, and after the battle you'd come back and get it. A lot of times, and especially in this situation with the Army of the Cumberland, they would never see their knapsacks again, and they'd lose everything. But they laid down with their muskets in line of battle for the night, and they couldn't have fires because they were so close to the enemy, and that was for both sides. And they tried to sleep in freezing temperatures. So the next morning, Braxton Bragg sends a courier to find General Polk to tell him to start the battle again on the next morning, which would be September 20th, 1863. The courier, he never finds General Polk. So the whole left wing of Braxton Bragg's army doesn't start the fight on time. And while this is going on, General Polk issues orders for his men to go ahead and start cooking breakfast. They pull men back further off the line, and build small fires so they can start cooking. You still have men on the line watching, but you pull some of them back, and so Braxton Bragg at this point is furious that Polk has not started the engagement for the day. Finally, he sends another courier in the early morning to find him. General Polk doesn't start his engagement till roughly about 9:30 in the morning, when he was supposed to start that first light. So they've had hours to sit there in daylight and look at each other, and nobody's doing anything. So on the other side of the field, Rosecrans has got his men stationed. You've got General Sheridan protecting the left. You've got Van Cleve in the center, Negley in the center. You've got, leading on up to the northern end of the battlefield, you've got Palmer, Johnson, and Baird. And on the Confederate side, you have on the right flank facing Thomas, you've got Forrest's cavalry, and you got Breckinridge, Claiborne. You've got Hood's men dead in the center. You've got Buckner, and then on the extreme left flank of the Confederate Army, you've got Princeton. And you've got General State Wright's Gist, Walker, and Liddell in reserve. And you've got Cheatham in reserve. So the fighting commences on the left flank. And during this time period, while Rosecrans is doing a survey of his line, from his angle he sees that General Wood's men is not in line with the rest of the army. What General Rosecrans sees from his angle is that there's a gap in the line. And he sends a courier to tell General Wood to move up and connect with the unit on his flanks. Well, General Wood sends a message back that they are online and they're being engaged by the Confederates. And this contest of will goes back and forth between General Rosecrans and General Woods, until finally General Wood says, "Yes, sir, I will move up and connect." General Wood pulls his men out of line and takes them to the extreme far left flank of the Federal Army. He opens up a gap within the Federal lines at roughly about a half-mile gap. And that gap that is now formed is at the exact same place that General Longstreet sends his whole First Corps, Army of Northern Virginia, through. And the Federal lines just start melting away, and men start retreating back across the field. It's complete chaos and panic. And all along the Confederate lines, they start pushing forward, and men just start falling back. They get pushed all the way back across the field to Horseshoe Ridge and Snodgrass Hill. General George H. Thomas, a native Virginian who's still loyal to to the federal cause is one of the few commanders left on the field. And he sets up a defensive position along Horseshoe Ridge and Snodgrass Hill. And at this time, while he's setting up his defenses, he soon realizes that he is the only federal unit still left on the field, facing down. Brand new, elite unit of General Lee's army, who is General Longstreet, and he's facing all of the Army of Tennessee. And he holds fast. He continues to hold Horseshoe Ridge and Snodgrass Hill. And repeated Confederate assaults is pushed back and continued to be pushed back. And the rest of the Army of the Cumberland is on the road heading towards Chattanooga and retreating out of there. So the Confederate troops that was engaging General Thomas was General Longstreet's men. And this is how Longstreet's men would have been dressed at the Battle of Chickamauga. You see here, this is the English army cloth that had been shipped from England through the blockade. They had to run the federal blockade to get supplies in. The pants is a French material. Of course, English shoes, English musket, English haversack, English knapsack with English mess tin on the back. From a distance, this exact uniform would have looked like a federal soldier wearing blue, because the gray starts to turn to a blue color from far away. So this is the first time in the American Civil War that Federals had ever seen Confederates dressed like this. And for the most part, the Army of Northern Virginia, from this point all the way to the very end of the war, would have had some kind of combination of uniform like this. At times, they were dressed better than their federal counterparts, especially at Chattanooga in the next month or two. But when they first started engaging the Confederates that were coming up Snodgrass Hill, a staff officer told General Thomas that we got Confederates coming in on our left flank. And General Thomas looked through his field glasses and said, "No, that's General Gordon Granger's Reserve Corps coming in to help us." Well, General Gordon Granger's Reserve Corps was actually in the town of Chickamauga when the fighting was going on. So for the past two days, they've sat there and waited for orders to come into the fight and help, but no orders had come to them. So disobeying orders and going at his own accord, General Granger gets his reserve corps up and starts moving them to the sound of the fighting. And this is during what I consider as phase 3 of the fight, the fighting at Snodgrass Hill and Horseshoe Ridge. But the troops that were coming up on General Thomas's left was not General Granger's Reserve Corps. There were another brigade that belonged to General Longstreet that was dressed like this. And the Confederates that were coming up through that direction couldn't understand why the Federals wasn't shooting at them. They just stood there and watched them. And finally, the Confederates had enough of this stalemate of them not shooting. The Confederates start forming in a line of battle, and they start shooting at the Federals. Well, at that time, the Federals finally see the Confederate battle flag through the smoke and realize that that's Confederates coming at them in what they think is in Federal uniforms. In that portion of the field, the Confederates are pushed back again. And all along the lines, what's left of the lines, the Confederates are pushed back. And at the front of Snodgrass Hill, from the 2nd South Carolina Sharpshooters of Jenkins Brigade, a sergeant by the name of Robert Kirkland, and you would know Robert Kirkland as the Angel of Marie's Heights at the Battle of Fredericksburg, who came over the wall and gave aid and water to wounded Federals at the Battle of Fredericksburg, and he earned himself a nickname as the Angel of Marie's Heights. He was killed at the base of Snodgrass Hill when the 2nd South Carolinas came in to the fight at that portion of the field. Just in time, Gordon Granger's Reserve Corps comes into sight, and General George H. Thomas couldn't be happier that he's finally getting reinforcements. But Rosecrans and 85 to 90% of the Army has already left the field and left them there to fight it out, because he's so panic-stricken with the rest of the Army that they are now at this stage starting to enter into Chattanooga. At this point, it's starting to get dark, and the fighting starts to die off, and General Thomas finally starts to see some hope that he can get his men off the field without getting captured. So he starts pulling his units one at a time off the line and putting them on the road to Chattanooga. And by the next morning, all of the Federal Army is within the defenses of Chattanooga. General Braxton Bragg has finally won himself a victory. But is it really a victory when he's lost close to 19,000 men? And one Confederate said at the end of the fight that the Army of Tennessee let out a yell that has never been heard since the city of Jericho from the Bible. And later on, in the following days after the Battle of Chickamauga, Braxton Bragg fails to pursue the Federals and crush them when he had the chance to. And Rosecrans, because of his disaster at Chattanooga, is relieved of command of the Army of the Cumberland and is replaced by General George H. Thomas. The loyal native Virginian to the Union earned himself the nickname the Rock of Chickamauga. So this is the conclusion of my history project, and at this time I would like to thank the General Longstreet Museum in Russellville, Tennessee for allowing me to come into the museum and basically take over the house and and do this video. And a lot of stuff in the house is original to the house, and these are the books that I'm citing for my project. Thank you.